system. All right. So why in the world should you care about the immune system? Well, if you are not currently sick, it is because your immune system is working for you. If you are currently sick, your immune system is also still working for you right now. So I think it is my favorite body system. Most of the time you don't even think about it because it's working so hard to fight for you. So that's pretty cool. But mainly the purpose is to defend our body from the absolutely constant barrage of pathogens that are trying to colonize inside of us, which is very dramatic, but true, because our entire world is full of bacteria. Our own body is covered in bacteria, which is actually part of our immune response, and we'll talk about that. We are constantly being inundated by these pathogens who are trying to colonize inside of us, and yet our immune system is doing this wonderful thing of keeping us healthy most of the time, almost all the time, minus those few instances where it slips up a little bit. And we'll talk about that as well. All right, so what you need to know about your immune system. So first of all, the immune system is one of the 3 body systems that you need to know for the AP exam. You need to know about nervous, immune, and endocrine system, right? So this is a really important one. And so what you need to know is that we have 3 lines of defense. And so we're actually going to spend a decent amount of time on this slide really quickly, just orienting ourselves to the information. We have a first line, second line, and third line of defense. And the first 2 lines, these 2 over here, are part of our innate immune system. And what you need to know is that innate immunity, and sorry, I should have mentioned this. If you haven't joined me before, a lot of my talking is just based off of images. It's really important that you have some sort of note sheet out with you so that you have something where you can record this information as opposed to just absorbing. Or you can watch replays, those work too. Okay, but the first line, so the innate immune system, innate means inherent or born into you. So if anyone's ever told you you're innately talented at something, 1, it's a very high compliment. You should thank them for that. But 2, it means you were born with it. You're just naturally great at math, or you're a naturally amazing runner. And so the innate immune system is the immune system that we are born with, that we are programmed with it. It does not depend on exposure to any pathogens, right? It is what it is, and it is non-specific. And by non-specific, I mean your innate immune system just attacks blindly anything that is not you. It doesn't remember pathogens. It's not targeting specific pathogens. It is just fighting against anything that is not you. And in a few slides, I will show you how it does that, okay? So first line of defense and second line of defense fall into this innate immune category. Again, non-specific, we're born with it. It does not change over time. It is the same today as it was yesterday, as it was 5 months ago, okay? On the flip side, our third line of defense, or our adaptive immunity, also known as our acquired immunity, there's a couple different words that you can use for this immune system. This is actually highly specific. So our adaptive immune system, this third line of defense, targets specific pathogens. It has memory of those pathogens. So if you get infected with the same thing a second time, you won't get sick from it. And that's because of your adaptive immune system. It changes over time, right, because of everything that I just said. So if you get sick with something, then you form memory to it. And so therefore, your immune system is changing over time. The vaccines tap into this third line of defense, and we can talk about that for sure. And it's actually slower, so we'll talk about that as well. So our innate immunity just kind of happens instantaneously in that non-specific level, whereas our adaptive immunity takes longer to get up and running, but is going to protect us from secondary infections with the same thing. And there are some important components of the first, second, and third lines of defense listed below in each of those columns. And I'll get into talking about all 3 of those and the components within them in detail in the coming slides. Any questions about anything that I just went into? Okay, perfect. Well, then, the first line of defense. So again, this is part of our innate immune system. It's non-specific, it's quick, and it's basically all of our outer coverings, as well as some internal things, but nothing in our bloodstream or anything like that. So anything that basically has access to the outside is in some way protected by this first line of defense. So the first one that I like to talk about is the skin. Your skin, right? Think about if you didn't have skin. One, that's terrifying, okay? Two, pathogens, if I like touch the table right now, all of the bacteria that's on this table, or more importantly on my computer, because my kids just did, they just swabbed my computer and we incubated the bacteria that were growing on it, and it's a lot, so that's terrifying. But if I touched those things and I didn't have skin, those bacteria would immediately enter my body. So the vast majority of pathogens get prevented from entering your body just by the fact that you have an outer covering called skin that keeps you, it's a physical barrier, right, between you and the outside world. Going along with skin, our skin is also covered in bacteria that we call our normal flora, and you'll see that right here. Normal flora is just the bacteria that colonate on our body. We're never bacteria free, but they actually help us, and I think, I definitely mentioned this if you were in our bacteria and viruses lecture, and if you weren't, you should watch the replay because it's very informative. But these bacteria are going to outcompete any bad bacteria that try to colonize on our body. And I should mention this, colonize just means replicate. We call bacterial colonies the little dots, if you've ever seen a petri dish with bacteria growing on it, of clusters of bacterial cells. So when I say colonize, I just mean that they're growing and replicating there. So those bacteria that naturally live on our skin are going to outcompete against the bad bacteria and provide competition for them so that they're not able to colonize. So that's a big thing. We also have this enzyme called Lysozyme. It's in tears, it's in some of our other secretions, but tears is actually a big one. And it's going to break apart the cell wall of bacteria. So every time you cry or tear up, or your eyes are tearing because you got maybe dirt in them, the tears that you're producing actually have an antibacterial, antimicrobial enzyme in them that are actually helping to keep you from being sick. This is a good point to mention that like the inside of your nose has a thin membrane lining, as does your eyes, as does obviously your mouth is an opening into the outside world. So your nose and mouth are openings, and your eyes, that thin membrane, all of those are easy targets for bacteria to get through from one side to the other. And I don't mean just like if you touch your eye, you're going to get pink eye. I mean like any type of bacteria can enter through the membrane in the eye and actually enter your body and into your bloodstream. So I always tell my students, don't touch your face, just don't do it, because there's lots of ways that you can get sick there. Obviously the mouth, so our saliva has this lysozyme in it as well, but those things can only do so much for you. Okay, so that's a protection that we have in our eyes. The hair that's in your nose, and we have these little microcilia that actually brush things out of your nose, and that helps prevent infection from things getting inside, actually into our body, as you can follow that blue line there. So the hair in our nose is a good thing that basically just sweeps pathogen out. Mucus is a huge one. So you get really mucusy when you're sick because you're overproducing this thing that's basically supposed to wrap around bacteria and pathogens and get them out of the body, preventing infection. So when you're sneezing, your body is physically trying to remove itself of pathogen. When you're coughing, the body is trying to physically remove itself of pathogen. So those things are all part of this first line. Urinating, the flushing of the urinary tract can get rid of bacteria. So all of these things are things that we naturally do. We're born with them, and they will protect us against any pathogen, right? So non-specific and innate. Couple other things on here. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but the normal flora, the normal bacteria in your intestines also prevent us from getting infections. Same way that the bacteria on your skin do. They outcompete pathogens. And then your stomach is incredibly acidic, which helps to get rid of a lot of bacteria if you were to ingest bacteria like a foodborne pathogen. So those killer foodborne pathogens can actually survive at very low pH, very acidic content, which is how they're able to still get you sick even after they enter into the stomach. So all of these things, hopefully, you know about all of them, but it's just interesting to think that they're actually a very active part of our immune system, and that everything that our body is doing, like sneezing and coughing and producing mucus and tears and all of that kind of stuff, is actually there to protect us from infection. So that's really the Oh, flora and fauna, Aditi, great question. So fauna is more plant. I'm just actually re-looking this up because I want to make sure that I'm telling you the thing. Fauna is like plant life and flora is animal life, I think. Oh no, fauna is animals. Why do they call it flora? This is such a good question. I'm learning something right now. Flora, the plants of a particular region. So why do we call bacteria flora then? I'm so interested. Bacteria. Bacterial flora is a community of bacteria. So I guess flora is the microbiology word for just a community of bacteria, even though technically flora would be the plants and fauna would be the animals in an area. So great question, Aditi. Learned something today. Okay, cool. We're good with the first line? Awesome. First line, pretty straightforward. Okay, moving into the second line. Remember, the second line is also part of the innate system. But the way you want to think about these lines is truly like you would if this was like first line, second line, and third line of defense against an enemy, right? So we have like 3 different things that an enemy has to get through in order to actually get to us at the end. Okay, so if they've broken through the first line of defense, they've broken through the skin, they've gotten into the nose, into the bloodstream, however way they have, then we have a second line of defense. And if we go back to this first slide here, there are 4 different major parts of the second line of defense. We have phagocytic leukocytes, and so phagocytic leukocytes, a phagocyte is something that eats something. So if you remember, we talked about phagocytosis. That is the process of cellular eating. So phagocytic leukocytes are a type of a blood cell, but these guys, as well as our natural killer cells, can actually eat or digest pathogen. And so we'll also talk about a macrophage. Let me see if I put a picture up of a macrophage. This would be an example of a macrophage. Okay, but anything, we have lots and lots of cells, and you've probably seen lots of white blood cells that you've probably heard about, that basically wrap themselves up around pathogen, anything that's not you, and I'll tell you in a little bit about how our body detects us versus not us, self versus non-self. Okay, and so they're going to be these eosinophils, neutrophils, basophils, natural killer cells. All of these guys are going to be, and these macrophages, which we'll talk about in a little bit, they're actually able to wrap around anything that's not you and digest it. So they're essentially eating it, which is pretty interesting. And we'll see this because those macrophages and these phagocytic leukocytes are going to act as something really important called an antigen presenting cell, which is going to trigger our third line of defense. But these guys can actually, if you have like just a relatively small infection, they can actually come on in and eat all of the pathogen. And you can kind of see it over here as well. We have these white blood cells that are slipping through the blood vessel wall into where it looks like we had some sort of splinter or some sort of cut in which bacteria entered the body because they were able to break through the skin layer. And you'll see that they're actually eating these bacteria and getting rid of them. And so if it's a small infection like that, we can take care of it with just these phagocytes, which is what these guys are, eating up these bacteria. With this also, it's good to mention the inflammatory response. Okay, so the inflammatory response is going to be a group of chemical signals that the body sends once it realizes that its first line has been broken through. And that's when you see, like you can see here, this little cut. If you've ever had like a cut on your finger and it starts to get a little puffy, a little red, and a little warm, or any cut anywhere really, that's your inflammatory response. So your body has sent out chemical signals that are drawing a lot of these phagocytes to the area and these macrophages to take care of the problem. They're signaling other cells to come through as well, which leads to that swelling. And they're also making your blood vessels leaky. So you can see these cells are able to these blood vessel cell walls are kind of coming apart so that these white blood cells can squeeze through and get to the area of infection. And so all of that is going to lead to kind of some inflammation, some swelling, and some heat to the area because of all the chemical signals that have been sent and because of the leakiness of the blood vessels allowing more fluid and more cells into the area. So that's another major way that we get rid of infection if it's not too bad, if it isn't too strong, we can kind of take care of it with just some white blood cells. Pus, if you've ever seen that, which is really gross, it's a gross word, that's going to be groupings of white blood cells and dead white blood cells. So that's what that is. So that's pretty nasty, but that's what happens if you have an infection, and you know you have an infection because there's lots of white blood cells in the area. Last one that I'll talk about for second line of defense, this picture down here, that's the fever. So your body will actually warm itself up trying to kill the infection, right? Because most bacteria and viruses have like a prime temperature range that nicely fits with our body temperature. So your body will try to heat itself up and sends out chemical signals to heat itself up in order to kill the infection. And obviously sometimes it's an overreaction. If you have a fever that goes too high, it can be incredibly damaging because our own body cannot withstand that temperature. But that's your body really trying to say like, hey, we're heating up here, we're getting rid of this pathogen, because high temperatures will oftentimes kill bacteria or viruses, either or. Okay, so again, second line of defense, it's after that kind of like external first line, but we're still non-specific, right? Inflammation, these phagocytic leukocytes, and fever, that is meant to kill any pathogen, not one in particular. And so this is still part of that non-specific thing. And you're also born with all these things. You're born with the ability to have a fever, you're born with these phagocytic leukocytes, etc. Questions about second line? Okay, lovely. Then let's talk about the located line, which is our third line of defense, which is very, very cool, but also a little bit tricky. So we'll spend some good time here, and please do not hesitate to ask a question if you have them. You can ask them in the chat. You can ask them with the little ask a question thing at the bottom, and I will be sure to answer it for you. I'll check back frequently. So when I'm sharing my screen with you, it's because I'm looking at my PowerPoint. So sometimes I can't see if you guys ask a question. Okay. All right, so the third line of defense is either the acquired or the adaptive response. Both names should make sense. It's acquired over time because it develops memory to pathogens that you've been exposed to. And so it gets, stronger and develops kind of over time. And adaptive because it's adapting to whatever environment and pathogen it's fighting against at that time. So I have this kind of like major picture to show you here, but we're gonna break out actually into what all of these individual cell types are, because you do need to be familiar with them. Acquired immunity is only going to be in vertebrates, in space vertebrates, not invertebrates. Let me write that in this little chat because that's a helpful thing to know. Adaptive or acquired, same difference. It's only in vertebrates. I can explain why that is once you see these two major cells, these B cells and these T cells. They all get made in the bone marrow. And so if you don't have a skeletal system, then you can't make B and T cells to produce them in. Okay, so let's talk about all these individual moving parts because this is a lot. As a reminder, the acquired adaptive immune system is specific and changes over time, and we're going to target specific pathogens. Cool. Okay. I think I kind of already alluded to that. I'm repeating myself. All right. So how is your body then going to recognize, and this kind of goes into the second line of defense too, because we do have those phagocytic leukocytes that can tell who you are versus who you are not. But this is majorly important in the acquired or adaptive because our body is going to remember these pathogens. And so how does your body know what is you and what is not you, and let alone start to remember the things that are not you? And it all has to do with proteins on the surface of cells. So our cells have a self marker, something that's showing your whole body that you are who you say you are, if you will. And if you tuned in when we were talking about genetics and blood typing, then you know that the proteins on the surface of your blood cells are unique to you, and your body will rebel, throw a fit if a different blood type gets put into your body. And so all of our cells have something called MHC, which is a type of protein on their exterior. And it highlights the fact that you are you. And so all of your immune system, these leukocytes, these macrophages, these phagocytic blood cells that are coming along trying to make sure that you're not under attack, are going to basically scan the surface of every cell and be like, oh yeah, hey, that's me. That's my own MHC protein. We're good to go. On the same vein, other cells, so this would be a pathogen, have something called an antigen on the surface. So pathogens have antigens, which is slightly confusing, but very important that you know the difference. And antigens are markers or proteins on the surface of foreign cells, and your body will recognize those as being not you and therefore stage some sort of attack. And there's a number of different ways that cells can attack, and we'll get into that. So your own cells have proteins on them. Cells that are not you also have proteins on them, and your body is able to tell the difference. And that all happens with B and T cells, which we're going to talk about. And when they mature, they actually learn who you are and who you are not. And so that's a big part of the immune response is your body being able to detect these little proteins called antigens versus the MHC proteins that are you. Whew, sorry, guys. Sometimes when I talk, I feel like I have to yawn. It has nothing to do with like being tired or anything. Okay, good with that? I don't see any questions. So hopefully everyone's just like, yes, all makes sense. That's the goal. Okay, so we have that. And then we also have, so I'm going to go through a lot of different cell types here and things. So we have this antigen, and then we have antigen presenting cells, okay? And so antigen presenting cells basically eat or digest these pathogens here, and then they present the little antigen on the surface of them. And so you're wondering, well, like, oh, why don't we just bounce into this pathogen in the free parts of the blood? And the answer is we do that as well, and I'll show you that. But these cells are really helpful, like macrophages, right? Those are like your white blood cells that eat things, okay? They're going around chomping on anything that's not you at all times. So if you're under attack and they chomp on something, they're just going to go ahead and then present that antigen on the surface of their cell, and this ignites our own immune system again to be like, hey, we're under attack. I ate this thing, but like this, there's something inside of me, and we need to take care of it. Okay. There's also dendritic cells. Those are what the DCs are on the left-hand side. I won't talk as much about those as macrophages. And then B cells. And I'm not going to get into too much information about them yet because I have a couple slides on them. But they can also present antigen on their surface. So again, you just need to be aware that this is a class of cells that is able to digest pathogen and then present antigen on the surface of their cells. If one of your cells also, and I'll talk more about this in a little bit, but if one of your cells is infected, right, like it's been infected with a bacteria or a virus, an infected cell will also have this antigen on the surface, basically waving it as like a white flag of saying, hey, I'm under attack, I need some assistance here, okay? Cool. Questions about antigen presenting cells or antigens? Great. Well, they're all going to come together and help our immune system defeat the really bad pathogens, because this is our third line. So again, the vast majority of infections can be handled by lines 1 and 2. Most of the time, we don't ever get sick even because of lines 1 and 2. But line 3 comes in if we get past those two and really need the big guns in there. Okay. So the other types of cells, and I'm just kind of cruising through, if we go back to this picture, I'm cruising through all the different things here. So we have this pathogen and antigen. We have an antigen presenting cell right here with this macrophage. So I want to make sure I talk about all of these before I talk about all these other moving parts. So the other two major components of the acquired or adaptive immune response are our B and our T cells, which you may have heard of before. They're really, really important immune system cells. I'm going to walk through both of them and then show you how all of these work together. Okay, so T cells are called T cells because they mature in the thymus. And the thymus is an organ that's kind of like right here on your neck, chest area. It's a major organ of the immune system. And again, it's where our T cells are going to go to mature. And by mature, I mean truly like learn who you are versus who you are not. Learn self versus non-self. And so they're called T cells again because they mature in the thymus. Both B and T cells start in the bone marrow, but then T cells get moved to the thymus where they mature. So T cells are going to be involved, and this will make more sense once I show you what these responses actually look like. But T cells are going to be involved in the cell-mediated response. So what I mean by that is T cells are majorly responsible for targeting infected cells and antigen-presenting cells. They are not able to bind free pathogen that's moving in your blood, right? So they can't just like bump into a bacteria that's next to them and be like, oh my gosh, we're under attack for whatever reason. They can only bind infected cells or antigen-presenting cells, okay? And then they'll do a number of things once they bind your infected cells or your antigen-presenting cells. So our T helper cells, so there's 3 different types of these guys. Our T helper cells are going to bind those antigen-presenting cells. And when they do, basically they send off the alarm. They're like, we're under attack, we're under attack, we're under attack. So they'll signal the rest of the immune system that we're under attack with this specific pathogen. And our T helper cells are going to be really important in basically boosting up the rest of the immune response. So they'll signal some T cells, they'll signal some B cells, and they'll be like, let's get to work. The T cytotoxic cells, those are going to be the ones that don't bind the APCs, they actually bind infected cells. Because once your cells are infected, they basically need to die. They're of no use to us anymore. They're not probably going to clear themselves of that infection. They just need to die. So the T cytotoxic cells are the ones that are going to go detect, using the antigen on the surface of those infected cells. They're going to go detect those infected cells and kill them. Just another way that we get rid of infection. T cytotoxic cells can also actually detect cancerous cells and kill them, but a lot of cancers actually suppress their activity, which is why it can spread without being killed by our own immune system, which it should be. The last T cell that we'll talk about is T memory cells, and they remember pathogens for secondary infection. B memory cells are going to be more involved in this like secondary infection thing. So when we talk about those in a second, you'll see that. The major T cells that you really need to know about are the T helper cells and the T cytotoxic cells, but it's also good to know that the T cells can also produce memory and therefore help themselves out the next time you're under attack with an infection. Okay, so cell-mediated response, they bind to antigen-presenting cells, that's what APCs are, in order to alert the rest of our immune system that we're under attack, and they also kill infected cells if they're a T cytotoxic cell. Really quickly, just how T cytotoxic cells work. So they'll go and they'll bind to an infected cell, and they'll know it's infected due to the antigen that's presented on the surface of the infected cell. And then that cell is destroyed and digested by the rest of the body. Specifically how that works is that the T cells release this protein called perforin, which punctures the cell membrane. Basically, this protein, this perforin protein perforates, right? That's where it came from, like punches lots and lots of holes in the outside of the cell, and then that cell kind of explodes due to these big giant holes that's been punched in the surface of it. It kind of just explodes. So T cell binds, releases this killer protein, and the target cell explodes. Pretty dramatic, but that's our body for us. Very dramatic individuals we are. Okay. B cells, and I promise I'll show you how this all comes together in the immune response in a few slides here. But B cells are called B cells because they mature in the bone marrow. So they start in the bone marrow, they mature in the bone marrow. Same process, they're learning you from not you. And they're involved in the humoral response. And humors are the fluids of your body, so your lymph and your blood. And so while T cells can only interact with infected cells, B cells actually act with that free-floating pathogen, so that free-floating bacteria or virus that's in the blood. That's what B cells are going to be responding to. So there's a couple of different ways that they respond to that. One is that they will produce something called an antibody, which I show you on the next page, that corresponds to a specific antigen. So B cells are the producers of antibodies, which you may have heard of before, which basically get produced. If you've ever seen, it's like my favorite episode of The Magic School Bus. It's called Inside Ralphie. Ralphie gets sick, and they go inside of him to figure out why. And then they see these like little stick-looking things getting thrown at the bacteria. Really brings me back to childhood. It is you can find it for free online, so you should look it up. But those little stick-looking things are antibodies, and they are very, very specific to a specific antigen. So we have millions of different B cells with different antibodies that can respond to millions of different pathogens, just depending on what we're infected with. And basically when we are infected, when the B cell finds a pathogen in the blood, it will kind of go through a process of matching up and figuring out which antibody and which B cell matches this specific pathogen. And this is why our acquired immune system takes so much longer. So we have to go through this process of finding what the heck this pathogen is, and finding a B cell that will match it. And then it produces antibodies and basically throws these specific antibodies at it. And it's basically like a handcuff that wraps around that pathogen and helps prevent that pathogen from reproducing and getting us more sick. And I'll show you that on the next slide. B cells, as I already mentioned, are also antigen presenting cells, and I'll show you that in a second too, because they can present antigen to the T cells in order to also expedite this whole process. Important to know that some passive immunity actually gets handed down to you through the placenta and breast milk. There's lots of antibodies in breast milk, which is why doctors oftentimes push for women to breastfeed their children, just because those antibodies get passed through that and they wouldn't get passed through in a formula. But yeah, so you can actually get some antibodies and some resistances or some heightened immune responses from your mom before you're even, able to hold your head up. So that's kind of cool too. So types of B cells, just two types. There's B plasma cells, and these cells produce lots and lots of antibodies. So they're just going to be our big antibody factories. So they're producing all these antibodies and throwing them at the infection in order to remove it. And then there's B memory cells, which remember pathogen for secondary infection. And these are going to be even more important when we talk about vaccines. Okay. So antibody production, so we just talked about this, is these little stick-like figures. So they look like little Ys, but the end regions, the end of the Y, if you can see my hands on the screen here, if you can see the region that's binding to the bacteria or the virus, those are very, very specific binding regions that will only bind to a certain pathogen. And so you can see there's a number of ways that antibodies can actually get rid of an infection. More often than not, these three ways: neutralization, agglutination, and precipitation. The antibody is just handcuffing this virus or this bacteria or whatever it might be, and basically making it immobile, so it can't replicate, it can't go infect cells, it can't really do anything bad, right? And then it just enhances or calls over macrophages or white blood cells to eat that bacteria or that virus and get rid of it. So it's basically just like, truly, the way to think about it is it's handcuffing the bad guy until the police can come and get rid of it. So that's what these antibodies do, and they keep us safe from infection because the bad guys aren't able to do any bad when they're in handcuffs. Sometimes it can activate our complement system, which is another way that we get rid of bacteria by basically punching holes in them. But more often than not, I would just focus on antibodies as enhancing phagocytosis. So they're tagging and kind of getting rid of these bad guys until a white blood cell can come and eat them. And so that's a major, 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 major thing that the B cells do for us, is produce these antibodies and make sure that we're getting rid of all of these pathogens that are in the humors of the body, so the blood and the lymph. So we basically have T cells to work on our infected cells, and then we have B cells to work on all the free-floating pathogen that's in our body still. Okay, so the really cool thing about having memory B cells is that the first time we're exposed to something, we don't produce that many antibodies against them, and it takes a decently long time, about a week from infection, for us to actually get cooking with producing these antibodies at all. And it takes about over 2 weeks for us from infection to full peak production. So it takes a pretty long time. And you can see we don't even produce that many antibodies the first time. Our B cells are just like trying to figure out what the heck this thing is, and they'll produce some antibodies against it, but it takes a long time to find the right match and then amp up production of those antibodies. But the second time we are exposed, you can see that it takes less than 7 days to get to peak, so maybe like 5 days as opposed to 14, and logarithmically way more, 10 to the 4 versus 10 to the first amount of antibodies. So the second time you get exposed to the same pathogen, you don't get sick because we produce so many antibodies that we wrap up all of the pathogen and our body takes care of it before you even know you're sick. So this is truly what vaccines utilize. So what we've done is we've created an arbitrary first infection, first exposure. So flu vaccine. So we give you a weakened version of the flu. So your body doesn't get sick because the flu virus is dead or heat killed, or not dead, but heat treated, it's inactivated. And so you're still producing these antibodies, but you're not getting sick because the virus can't actually do anything being inactive. But then the second time, if you were actually exposed to the flu, your body would do this crazy reaction and get rid of the flu virus before you even knew you were sick or infected with anything. So this is truly how vaccines are gonna capitalize, because we have this memory and we have such a logarithmically larger reaction the second time around, and it happens in a much quicker time frame. You can see here, so the reason that we have antibodies B on here is that resistance to one pathogen has no effect on resistance to the other pathogen. Just because you have the flu doesn't mean you're not going to get chicken pox, right? But the second time you get the same strain of flu, you wouldn't get sick. But the flu is so rapidly evolving that you can get the flu every single year because there's so many different types that are out there. So that's a cool thing with B cells. So what does this all look like together? So basically, we have some sort of macrophage, right, which is an antigen-presenting cell. You can see it's eating up this pathogen. It's digesting it, and then it's presenting this antigen on its surface. It is an antigen-presenting cell. So here it is, holding out a piece of this pathogen, being like, hey, guys, I got something. You should check it out, okay? So once the antigen has digested this pathogen, we have the T helper cells coming in, and they're like, oh, shoot, we're under attack, right? And we have this match between the T cell receptor and the antigen. So this T helper cell knows exactly what type of antigen we're under attack with and can therefore send the correct T cytotoxic cells that are going to kill our infected cells, and then B cells that are going to produce antibodies and take care of all the pathogen that's in the blood and other humors of the body. Okay, so our T helper cell binds, then it sends all of these signals to other T helper cells, to B cells, and to T cytotoxic cells that we are under attack with this thing, just via this binding. Okay, so it's going to signal the T cytotoxic cells to go into this cell-mediated immunity. So what they're going to do is go get the infected cells and kill them using perforin, right? Punch holes all through their membrane. And we'll get rid of the infection of our cells. And then our B cells are going to go ahead and produce antibodies that are specific to this pathogen, this antigen and pathogen, therefore. And it's going to produce lots and lots and lots of antibodies so that we can wrap up all of the pathogen that's in the blood and eat that and take care of that as well. So now we don't have any more infected cells. We don't have any more infection in our blood, and we are soon to be infection-free because of our body fighting so very hard via this very complex process. So I have one more way to kind of show you this. It's just like a different flow chart, right? And it kind of just shows the different avenues here. So the major part in the middle is that macrophages are going to act as our antigen presenting cells. So we're going to kind of have like three things happening at once. We have antigens in the blood that are going to start to trigger the humoral response. We're going to have antigens in infected cells that's going to trigger the cellular response. And then we have macrophages going around and eating these pathogens and acting as cells. So when the helper T cell binds with this macrophage, it's going to be like, oh my gosh, we got to expedite this process here. So it's going to alert the B cell to make memory B cells, which will make antibodies and also remember this pathogen for later. It's going to activate plasma B cells, which are going to make tons and tons of antibodies to get rid of the free antigen or free pathogen in the blood. And then the T helper cells will also activate our cellular response, which is going to make memory T cells and cytotoxic T cells so that we can remember this infection for later, should it come again, and we can kill any cells that have been infected. Phew. I know that's a lot. It's a big process. It's keeping you not sick every single day, which is pretty darn impressive. So that's that. If you don't have any questions, I have a really great Kahoot game for us to play. I just got to figure out how to play it. So give me like one singular minute to just make sure I understand how to work this Kahoot thing. I sound like I'm 80 years old right now. So stay on the line, because it's just going to be a couple of review questions you guys can kind of compete against. Yeah. So it's loaded. Generator opponent. Okay. All right. Okay, so if you have Kahoot, or you can go on Kahoot on your computer, I have our code for us. I think I can just, oops, shoot. Why am I so bad at this? I'll just post this here. Tell me if this works. You guys are gonna really help me out here. Is it working? Is anyone in? Doesn't look like it. Maybe I need to send you this instead. Here's our game pin. Try that. Did that work? I'm gonna try it. Try it on my phone. Is anyone playing? Does anyone want to play? So it looks like I have 0 players. One more link to try. It might be the same one. Hello? Are any of you playing? Okay, so it looks like you just need to go, if anyone really does want to play. I put the code, it's 46738 if you want to play. So I think you just need to go to Kahoot.it. This is like the 5th link I've sent you guys. Kahoot.it, that's the last link I sent you. And then if you look 2 up, 46738 is our game code. 46738 is our game pin. Did that work for everyone? I still don't see anyone. All right, well, I'll wait for you guys. I haven't seen any questions, so if people are interested in playing, I'll stay around for like another 4 minutes. If people aren't, that's fine. Okay, well, I think the link for the screen that displays the question is different than the one you posted after the code, after the changed code. What if you just go to kahoot.it and put in that code? What happens then? So just try the last link and try putting in our game pin. That should work. If you just go to the last link. Oh shoot, this is really confusing. Ugh, how do I do that? It doesn't work. Let me try to turn off. I'm gonna turn off the two-step joining thing. Okay, let's try this. All right, now just the pin should work. You don't have the second step anymore, so just try the pin. So go to kahoot.it, and then the code is 46738. Cool, that should work. These 3 players. Oh wait, 30 more seconds. 4 players, yes! Wait, now we only have 1. What happened? Wait, like 1 more minute. I don't know why it keeps showing players and then not showing players. Okay, now we have 4 players again. Is anyone else trying to join still? Cool. I'm just gonna go ahead and get started then. Technology is hard. All right. Here we go. All right, which type of cell is not involved in the immune system? Five seconds. No one answered. Uh-oh. What happened? Well, the answer was red blood cell. We'll try again. Next question. Which sector of the immune system specifically targets pathogens? 15 seconds on the clock. No one answered again. Wait, can no one play? Is it not working? Did I do something wrong? Anyone? Anyone? On the screen at Kahoot, the only thing that shows up. Ugh. All right, guys, we might have to back the game for tonight then. I'm sorry. I'll figure it out for next week because I like this game a lot. I just don't know how to, I guess I don't know how to share it. The two-step thing is still there. And I guess usually when you play, it's like up on the screen, and then you can just click your answer like in a classroom. I've never played this like virtually, so I truly don't understand how this works. So I am sincerely sorry. Maybe we'll play at the beginning of next week and see what people know about the immune system, and then we'll end with one on the nervous system, which is what we're going to talk about next week. So thank you for bearing with me through these like last 10 minutes of struggle. I promise I will figure this out. I will ask someone who is better at technology than me to make sure that we can do this next week. Next week's nervous system, also a really great one. Hopefully you still learned something today. And again, come back next week. It'll be Wednesday as normal. And we'll be able to jump in and talk about the immune system a little bit and then the nervous system. Apologies, but have a great week. I will figure out my technology in the meantime. And I will see you next week. Bye, y'all.